2006. My name is Rosalind Benjet. We are here today to take the oral history of Harold Pollman and for the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. Harold, tell us about your family. You're from South Dakota?
North Dakota.
North Dakota.
I'm from North Dakota. My father immigrated to this country in 1904 or 6. I have his naturalization papers in my office and I didn't look up the precise date. My grandmother and my grandfather immigrated to New York substantially before then.
From where did they live in Europe?
They lived in Russia, in an area at one time that was known as Lithuania, and then Russia, and then they immigrated to New York. My grandfather had a shirt factory, and then my grandmother did not work in the shop. My father came to this country in 1904. I knew my grandmother and my grandfather, but my father came in 1904, and he immigrated from Russia. And his first job was that of a hod carrier. A hod carrier carries the mortar up the escalated planks. He was not a bricklayer. He could not lay brick, but he was a hod carrier, and he carried the mortar up there. But he realized that the hod carrier was the lowest paying common labor you could pay, so he learned bricklaying, and he became a bricklayer. Shortly thereafter, he met my mother, who was born in New York, of her parents who had already immigrated here from Russia and Lithuania area, and she was a secretary bookkeeper for the Lerner dress factory and dress shops. She kept books and was a secretary and could type. She went 1 year to NYU, but she had 2 brothers who were bright, and they were destined, Uncle Charles and Uncle Fred, and they were destined to become doctors. Her family could not afford for 3 children to go to college at the same time. Being a woman, it came natural that she would be the fallout. Girls didn't have to make a living, their husbands made a living for them. So she went to secretarial instead of to college, and was a bookkeeper secretary, and my father met her in New York. After they went together for just a while, my mother told my father that she had a brother in Minot, North Dakota, in Schwarzschior someplace, and that he was a furrier, and he made ladies' coats out of mink and stoles out of mink and chokers out of red and silver foxes. And she was going to go out and visit him. And my father said, "Can I come out and visit you and your brother when you go to North Dakota?" She said yes. So she went out and visited Uncle Abe Brownstein in Minot, North Dakota, the furrier. And my dad told my Uncle Abe that he knew something about furs from Russia. And my Uncle Abe says, "Why don't you move out here and you can buy furs from the Indians and sell them, bring them to me to make furs out of. Can you bring me that book that is in the other room, please, that was just published by someone called America? I just got it about 10 days ago. That book, is it here? No, I don't think so. Is it here? Anyway, I'm sorry about this.
That's all right, I put it on pause.
Published. And there are, I think, 20 chapters, and one chapter is about me and my life, so it might fit into something you might want to take
Yes.
with you. So,
When was this when they went? You think? Do you have any-
so they came out there. No, no, no. So, the dates are in that book as reason. So, they went out there, moved out there in, I would guess about 1915 or something like that, 12 or 15. And the reason I know that date is because my dad ran from Russia because they were conscripting all of the people to go into the Russian army. And they were putting the Jewish boys in the front line trenches. So he and his brother, Alter, A-L-T-E-R, ran away from Russia. But when he got to the United States and North Dakota and had been here 5 years, 10 years, he joined the United States Infantry and went into World War I, the 164th Infantry in North Dakota, and he was in the infantry in World War I. My father was very entrepreneurial, and what he did is that he had a pickup truck, a little better than the one I drive today, and he...
This book?
No. Why she doesn't know that book that was published by Harvard. He went out to the Indians and traded for furs. And he got the idea that the farmers came in and brought their cans of milk from the cows every week. And when they brought in the cans at the cream stations, he gave each cream station a checkbook. It was really a draft book. There's a technical difference there. It doesn't clear without his permission. He gave him the draft book, and so he had 20, 30 cream stations around the state with draft books, and they bought furs from the Indians, and he picked up every week. He would make the circle. Finally, he had 2 trucks, 3 trucks, 5 trucks, and they would make the circle and pick up these furs from the Indians that brought in to the cream station. My biggest thrill, 2 big thrills. My big thrill was he took me one time to off of an Indian reservation, off of Devil's Lake, North Dakota. Used to be called Spirit Lake, and then they called it Devil's Lake. And he took me there with him to trade with the Indians one time. And we went into what would be kind of like a Mexican adobe brick, but it was blocks of mud made into bricks into a house. And we spent the night there in that. The big thrill wasn't spending the night in the mud adobe hut. The big thrill was that he took the battery out of his car, and he took a radio out of his car and brought it in to this hut. And that particular group of Indians at the Fort Totten Indian Reservation, I think they are Sioux Indian, although it's on the Cheyenne River, so I don't know whether it's Sioux or Cheyenne. But he took me in there and brought that radio in with him that night and plugged it into his car battery. And those Indians heard this magic box for the first time in their life. And they walked around behind the radio. They lifted. They didn't know where those singing voices were coming from. They lifted. They looked. And I was a young boy at that time. And it was such a thing for me to see the Indians seeing their first music box. And it was real thrill. The other big thrill that he took me every year, when he packed up his furs and everything in about March or April that he had collected all winter long, I've got pictures here for you later of his skinners, his Indian skinners, skinning these furs. They were skinning the furs. He would dry them, stretch them on stretchers and dry them, and put them on stretchers to dry, and then he would bundle them and bale them, mink, what you ladies call ermine, we call weasel, W-E-A-S-E-L, but you call them ermine, fancy. But we had mink, ermine, beaver, badger, wolf, coyote, that's about it if I miss. And he packaged them up, and he would take them to Winnipeg, Canada. Why? That was the international fur auction where fur buyers came from London, from New York, from Paris, from Canada, and we went to Winnipeg. And as a little boy, before I was even bar mitzvah, I was going to the international fur auction in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, and being exposed to people from Paris and London and New York and around the world. And I was living in Hicksville, North Dakota. So it was a real exciting young youth. Then, as I grew up, we went into the terrible, terrible 1930s Depression. And North Dakota was hit with a double whammy. Both the Depression economically and the Dust Bowl. And it devastated that part of the northern plains. And people moved to Oregon, they moved to Washington, they moved to California, and it devastated North Dakota. At that time, I now was getting to be 10, 11 years old. My dad said that I was going to work like a man and not like a kid. I went to school. I never missed a day of school. But I was going to work like a man and not like a kid, and therefore I would get a full man's wages. At that time, the minimum wage, the wage that was being paid, the approved government federal wage, was $1 a day. But don't get excited about $1 a day, because the day was 10 hours long. We got 10 cents an hour. The day was 10 hours. The legal federal law was 10 hours a day. We got 10 cents an hour. That was $1 a day. In 1932, Franklin Delano Roosevelt passed the Fair Labor Standards Act and raised the wages from 10 cents an hour to what was called 2 bits an hour. For you people, that's 25 cents an hour. The wages went to 2 bits an hour. And I came home and I said, Daddy, I'd been grading some furs, and we went home for lunch every day in my little town of Carrington, North Dakota. So, population of about 6,000. Mother went ahead of us from the bookkeeping typing of my dad's office. She went ahead and made lunch on a kerosene stove. My sister's job was to keep kerosene all the time for the stove. And my mother went ahead and made lunch. My father then walked from work to home for lunch. And I came home and I said, Daddy, he left me behind. I had been grading some furs. Daddy, Mr. Roosevelt, I heard on the radio, just passed a bill. We're going to get 2 bits an hour instead of 10 cents an hour. And that's $2 a day, because we're only going to have to work 8 hours a day. The day is 8 hours, no longer 10 hours. He took his hand like this, I can feel it now, and went wham on my bottom. And I said, why did you do that? He said, sit down on that sofa. Because I came through the front door and we went through the living room to go to the kitchen for lunch. He said, wham! I said, why did you do that? He said, because Mr. Roosevelt is going to break every businessman in this country. You cannot raise wages 15 cents an hour in 1 year. You raised it a nickel an hour the first year, a nickel an hour the second year, the third year a nickel an hour more, and then you get to 25 cents an hour, but you're used to it and you work in. You don't cut the time from 10 hours to 8 hours and raise it 2 bits in 1 day. Well, my dad was wrong. Roosevelt closed all the banks. We had a bank, you couldn't get money out, you couldn't put money in. My dad had to sign chits to the grocery store for his men to buy groceries. And then Roosevelt opened a bank with a new economic adjustment in everything. I told you about grading furs. I used to be able to grade furs for my father, even before bar mitzvah yet.
Well,
I got so good at grading minks that I could tell you a male mink from a female mink by the feel of the fur. How? How? How do you tell a male? No carcass. Okay, the carcass is gone. The skin is dried. You just got the fur. How can you tell a female mink from a male mink? Well, it's easy if you've been with the Indians and you know about these things. A female mink is mounted from the rear. And when she's mounted, it breaks the hairs on the back fur on her hind quarters. And so the female's mink fur is smooth and silky like the rest of the body. The female fur is broken and brittle and so forth. Enough of the fur years, enough of that. I went on into high school.
Before we do that, can we
Yes.
talk about Jewish life in North Dakota?
Jewish life in North Dakota was alive, but barely. In the town I told you about where my father's fur warehouse was, we were the only Jewish family. My sister and I were the only two Jewish people in the community. You know, I could be a part or I could be a separate nothing. I chose to be a part. I went to the Lutheran church. I attended, I didn't went. We always went to Minot for High Holy Days. It was just 400 miles, so it wasn't any job.
Just.
We would go to Minot. And, but Jewish life in Carrington was non-existent. The librarian in the city allowed her daughter to date me only. She wouldn't let her date any other of the boys in the high school because I had a gentility and a way, a mannerism, and Jewish and all that. She wasn't Jewish, but she would let Peggy date me. We moved to Grand Forks, which was about 200 east of there, and there we had a Jewish community. My father became chairman of the building committee and built a brand new shul. Didn't have the money, it wasn't money. He was the building man that knew about building and construction, and he became. This little community of 30 families, sometime got up to 35 families. You know the story about the sailors that were marooned in an island in the Pacific, rescued after many, many years, and they were Jewish. And when the rescue came, they had built their palapa that they lived in, but they had built 3 shuls. That was his shul, and that was my shul. And they said, well, why is there 3 shuls? There's just 2 of us. And they said, that's the shul that both of us ate. In my little town of Grand Forks, we had 2 shuls, Uncle Harry and Rabbi Papermaster's. Rabbi Papermaster was the main big shul. Uncle Harry had a little shulchala, a little shul. Some Fridays, we could not get minyan because people were working, hard working. We couldn't get minyan for both shuls. We would go to Uncle Harry's shul first, have a minyan, and then go to Rabbi Papermaster's shul and have a minyan, so that Uncle Harry could keep his shul. When they built the new shul, which is there now, B'nai Israel, when they built that shul, my dad brought together the 2 factions with one understanding. If you go there today, you will see B'nai Israel. But if you walk through the shul, you will see another little shul contained in there, and that's my Uncle Harry's shul. My not a real uncle. I mean, everyone's uncle and auntie. Everyone was grandma and grandpa up there with only 30 families, as covet respect. But if you go to B'nai Israel today, and by the way, I had 48 people at my break fast last week. I provide the break fast every year. I had 48 people. 10 were students from the University of North Dakota, and 6 were servicemen from the air base out there. But the rest was the 32 was the community. But if you go there today and walk through that shul, you will see Uncle Harry's shul completely with the old benches, with the old where you sit there and daven, where you put the tallis underneath when you leave. It just, my daddy and the Oren Kodesh, moved the Oren Kodesh over, the Bima, and he promised Uncle Harry that his shul would live forever if he would consolidate with our shul. And that's his claim there. And there, my folks are buried at that city. So that's the religiosity of the North Dakota Plains. Small, 20 families, 30 families, 40 families. And my dad also a throwback, when he moved with my mother to North Dakota, they were giving land grants to get settlers to come out there. And he got a land grant of land because he realized owning land was wonderful from a man from Russia. And he went broke the first year and lost his claim because you had to plant 10 trees and break 10 acres of land, and he didn't know up from down, and he lost his land grant. That's when he was in the fur business. In that little shtetl of Carrington, North Dakota, I entered into the American Legion National Oratorical Contest nationwide, and I won in Bismarck, North Dakota. I went on to, from Bismarck, I went on somewhere else, and then I went to Omaha, Nebraska and won, and then I went to the national finals of the American Legion Oratorical Contest, and I won second place in the National American Legion Oratorical Contest. So that was pretty much high school, outstanding orator, a high school champion in oratory at the spring championships. Graduated high school at that point. Do I go on here from now?
Yeah. Where'd you go to college then?
From high school, I wanted to go to the university, and I knew I wanted to be a lawyer when I was born. There was never a time I ever considered doing anything to be a lawyer. I read Thomas Jefferson, I read everyone that had anything ever do with law, constitutions, everything. And so I told my mother I wanted to go to law school. Where do you want to go to law school? Where else can you go to law school? Washington, D.C. I want to go to Washington, D.C. My mother was very politically minded, a Democrat, and she was a precinct chairman for our senator, Senator Gerald P. Nye. Senator Gerald P. Nye was a strict American First person. He was a pacifist. He was against anything to do with World War II, as was my mother. She was a pacifist, was against all that, and she talked to Senator Gerald Nye, and he made me an elevator operator in the Senate office building in Washington. That's when you had elevators that you had to cut it about 8 inches before you got to the floor, and it coasted to an even stop. And I got good at coasting it to an even stop. I went to school at George Washington University in the evenings and worked in the Senate office building, and then the hours were wrong for me to work and go to school there. So my mother did a few more phone calls, and I went to work for the FBI. And I went to work for the FBI as a file clerk. My job was filing and going to George Washington University. One of my great claims for fame in the United States history books of the world was that there were 8 Nazi saboteurs that landed on the coast of the United States at the beginning of World War II. And there were 8 Nazi saboteurs, and they were working up the coast to go to put poison in the water supply in New York and in Washington, D.C. All Nazi saboteurs were captured off the coast by North Carolina. Preparing for their trial, the FBI had them in jail and everything. Preparing for trial, their files were in the basement of the building I worked with. And one of my jobs as a clerk was in the morning to go down to the vault, sign out for the file for the SACs, special agents in charge, and carry them up to their offices. So I was instrumental in the 8 Nazi saboteurs of America that landed on American shore at the time of the beginning of World War II. And I was very, very impressed that I was participating in the conviction of these 8 Nazi saboteurs in World War II. When I left for service, and the pictures in my office, Mr. Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover, had a policy that when the men went in service, if they worked in the Justice Department building, they were to come by his office, and he shook hands with every man that were leaving for service. One of the thrills of working for the FBI, of course, was that on my floor there was another boy and myself and 120 girls. All the other boys were in service already. I hadn't gotten there yet. So it was nothing to get on a train at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday and zip up to New York, and the standing seating for Broadway plays, the standing behind the rail, was 50 cents a person with your student ID. So I saw every Broadway play before I went into service at 50 cents a night, and I stayed with my Aunt Gussie in New York and slept on her sofa. The girls stayed at the YWCA. Went into World War II.
What year was that?
Went into World War II in 1943. And took my training, became a navigator on heavy 4-engine bombers. And there's a leave out here somewhere I was going to talk about, but I forgot about it. But anyway, I went into service and went overseas. I flew 50 combat missions over Europe. We were shot up badly and crash landed in northern Yugoslavia, which was then still in German territory, and joined the partisan underground. I was not an escapee. I was not an escapee. I was an evadee. The buggers never caught me. And we joined partisan bands. Each man carried $10,000 of gold seal currency around our waist, money belt.
This was in Yugoslavia?
Uh-huh. But we always had $10,000 of gold seal escape currency. The dollars that you have in your purses are silver certificates backed by the full faith and credit of the government, and silver. This was backed by the full faith and credit of the American government, backed in gold bullion. And the government would retrieve these escape currency for actual gold bullion, and the partisans loved that. We walked behind German lines at night and worked our way down to the Adriatic coast. At the Adriatic coast, the partisans had a fishing boat that took us out to the island of Vis, V-I-Z, still there, still spelled V-I-S and V-I-Z. And there the British, due to their air-sea rescue experiences in the English Channel, the English sent in a pontoon plane, a 2-prop plane, and it landed, and you had 30 seconds to get aboard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we jumped aboard and flew back. At that point, we could have been repatriated back to the United States due to our experience and our escapism and all that stuff. But our captain called a vote when we got back. A couple days later, we got rested up, and we raised our hands, and they said, do we finish the missions or do we go home? We had 5 to go. To a man, we voted to continue flying combat missions.
And you were based in England?
Italy. I was based in Bari, Italy, and we still have a reunion every 10 years, and there were 42 of us at the last reunion that made it back the last time, 2 years ago. We go on every decade mark, and there's stories to tell about that. Someday we'll do a long story, not for this thing here, but the story about the little children who wanted chocolate, because we got 1 Hershey bar and 1 package of chewing gum, 1 Wrigley's and 1 Hershey every Friday. The children knew when they come up, hey Joe, chewing gum. At our last reunion, those little children brought with them to the reunion. Those little children brought to them at our reunion their grandchildren. Their grandchildren came to the reunion, and all the generations in between attended that reunion, because we had confiscated the land from them and bladed off a 500-year-old olive orchard and vineyard to make our runways. But we had stayed loyal to the LaRusso family all those years, and that's a whole nother story. Well, back here, after the service, I went back to the University of North Dakota. By the way, I was looking for pictures. Someone asked for pictures, and it reminded me of many things I had forgotten. Again, I couldn't join any fraternity at the University of North Dakota for the simple reason that I was Jewish, and they didn't take in Jewish, and I was there. However, that didn't stop me from being vice president of the student council. I looked through these books the other night. They're fantastic things that I hate to even admit to, but I was a president of the YMCA board but I couldn't join a fraternity. President of the YMCA board. I was the chief announcer and of a radio station, KFJM. KFJM is important because it's the second licensed radio station in America. The first licensed radio station was licensed by General Electric in Schenectady, New York. The second one was licensed by the engineering department of the University of North Dakota, radio station number 2 in the nation licensed. And I was a radio announcer there, and on Saturday and Sunday, because once I got to college, I wasn't going to shul every Saturday. My mom and dad weren't in charge anymore. But I walked, as a young boy before bar mitzvah, I walked to shul every single solitary Friday evening, every single Saturday morning, and walked what I hesitate at this moment to call the old man home from shul in North Dakota. But after that, I got a phone call when I came back from service, and I entered in the University of North Dakota. Didn't go back to George Washington. Wanted to get going, and I went into my first year. Well, I got my PhD, and then I went on to the first year of law school, and I got a phone call from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Tulsa, Oklahoma was the world headquarters for the oil industry at that time. And it was my brother-in-law, Arthur. And he said, "Can you come to Tulsa for Thanksgiving this year?" I was in law school, first year. And I said, "Well, I have to ask my mom and dad if I can." I was living at home in Grand Forks, going to the university. And I said, "I'll ask mom and dad if I can, but why?" He said, "I think you need to come here and visit your sister Laura and myself." I said, "Okay, I will, if I can get permission." My dad put me on a Greyhound bus, sent me to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I said, "What is this business? I love your turkey. It's been a wonderful meal. What?" He said, "I can't talk to you." I said, "So why am I here?" He says, "I can't talk to you. What I'm going to tell you happens to be, what do they call it now, professional information?
Privileged.
No, proprietary information, so I can't talk to you. But he was with Stanlin, Standard Oil of Indiana, Stanlin. He said, "We're spending millions and millions," and those days it wasn't hundreds of millions, it was millions. Millions and millions. The year is 1949. He said, "We're spending millions and we're not dumb. Amarada Petroleum Corporation is spending millions of dollars and they're not dumb. Someday, North Dakota may find oil. You need to take oil and gas courses if you're going to practice law." Went back after a good, sumptuous Thanksgiving dinner on the Greyhound bus, and I went to Dean Thormasgard, a real good, strong Scandinavian name, and I said, "Dean, I can't tell you this. It's proprietary information. I can't talk about it." But the oil companies are spending millions and millions of dollars on oil called seismographing. I'd like to explain that sometime when I had time, how seismography was invented by a French artillery officer in World War I by putting like a stethoscope to the ground, and he could hear the vibrations of the German cannon and locate them. So anyway, slumberjay became a method for discovering oil, and they were slumberjaying. So I went back to Dean Thormesgaard and said, Dean Thormesgaard, can you inculcate into our courses some oil and gas courses to learn? But I can't tell you why, except you know that they're looking for oil all over the western part of North Dakota. Could I get some oil and gas courses with my colleagues here? Mr. Pollman, that's very interesting. Let me take it up with the next dean's meeting, and we'll come back to me in two weeks. I come back. Dean, can we have some oil and gas courses? He said, Mr. Pollman, this is a state-financed institution using state funds, and we cannot roll the dice like the oil companies. Now here's famous words, branded in a hot branding iron across my forehead here. We cannot, branded, we cannot gamble state funds, here comes the words, on the remote, contingent possibility that North Dakota may someday become a petroliferous province. Is that words from a dean, a law dean? A petroliferous province, remote contingent possibility. All right, I'm done with Thanksgiving. I get on another Greyhound bus. I go to the University of Texas in Austin, Texas. And I asked the dean if he will let me enroll in law school at the end of that semester. And I said, this is proprietary information, but I have to study oil. Oh, he says, I know, they're doing a lot of that. Yes, we have we have all the courses you need. As I'm walking away from the dean's office and cutting across the campus, a man walks across my path. And I say, Mr. Maxwell, what are you doing here? And he said, Mr. Pollman, what are you doing here? And I said, Mr. Maxwell, I asked you first. He says, you know, that's fair. I'm looking to see if I can come on staff here as a professor at the University of Texas in oil and gas law. It was my real estate teacher from the University of North Dakota. And he says, what do you, I said, I'm seeking to enroll. He says, I won't tell if you won't tell. I said, nothing. So I went back to the University of North Dakota, finished up that semester, enrolled at the University of Texas in oil and gas law, and Mr. Maxwell was a teacher down here. I didn't have, he said, you're making B and B pluses at North Dakota. I'd be pleased to have you as a student. I took some courses from him, not in oil and gas, took some courses, graduated at the University of North Dakota, and then I got a phone call. I married a young girl from Kaufman, Texas, who lived out in Kaufman, who was going to school at the University of Texas. She was going to take an education major. She belonged to a Jewish sorority down there. I played Sammy down there, and I was the oldest person, of course, in the whole Sammy chapter because I was a World War II veteran, so they made me the pledge president. And I met this girl, and the way I met her was on a blind date, because her sorority sister, Shirley Balk of El Paso, Texas, said she got a date for me for the Halloween party. And would I go? I said, well, if she's a nice girl, yes, a wonderful girl, beautiful girl. She was very, very, still is, beautiful, beautiful girl. And made a date with her and didn't meet her till the Halloween party. She rode in on a broom because she's a witch, of course. And so she came on the broom, and I met her. We went to the Halloween party together. And about 2 or 3 days later, I said, I have a confession to make. She said, what? I said, Bobette Blankenship of Corpus Christi, Texas, has already asked me to go to her winter formal. And I said yes to her. I want you to tell me, do I break that date or do I keep that date? Because I never dated another girl after the Halloween party. I never went with another girl after I met that beautiful girl at the Halloween party. Never, ever. And she said, and I loved her for it. I have ever since admired that. She said, don't break that date. You go to the winter formal with Bobette Blankenship, and it won't change our situation at all. It was very nice, and particularly since the other girl was an AE5, and she was an SDT, my sweetheart. So there we went back to school. In about April, I get a phone call from a fellow whose picture is in this annual I saw, and his name was Claire Blickery, and he was teaching at a rural school in North Dakota on a farm. And he says, Harold, you're down there studying oil? I said, yeah, I'm down in Austin. I got 2 months to go for my degree. He said, Harold, get yourself up to North Dakota. I'm on the farm next to where they're drilling, and they're moving in more and more and more equipment, and they sure are, cut the camera, they sure are pissy up here, because he's talked with a heavy Scandinavian accent. They sure are pissy, you better get your butt up here. And I said, well, I went to Dean of the law school. I said, Dean, I can't tell you this. It's deep information. But they're going to discover oil in North Dakota. I got to get out of here. I know the man that's living on the farm where they're doing the drilling, and he wants me to get up here fast. I had met a man in this town of Dallas through a relative of Lee's by the name of M.B. Rudman. And he was a wildcatter, and he had acreage. And I told him, and I told Morty Friedman, her relative, that I was heading for North Dakota. And Rudman got a hold of me, and he says, there's no oil and gas attorneys in the entire state yet. No one in there practicing oil and gas law. You're my attorney. You're going to handle all my leases up there. And he was blocking up leases at 10 cents an acre. I told my bride, because we had gotten married by that, my last year of law school, gotten married, we're in our last year. I said, we're out of here. I went to the dean of the law school. I said, Dean, can I take my exams a month early? At that time, you took the bar exam in February, and you got word whether you passed, and then it was retained, it was restrained. You weren't given your bar, subject to your passing your law school exams in June. But you didn't have to take your exams in June, pass law school, and then wait another 3 months to get your bar degree. It was a waste of time. So you took your bar early in February, then you got your law, if you got your law degree, the bar took effect. I said, I've passed my bar, Dean. Can I take my exams a month early and get out of here? He says, let me see what we can do about it. He talked to each one of my courses. They gave me an exam for the course. They didn't tell me whether it's the same one they had written for the other students. I had one girl sitting on the left of me, because there was just one girl in the staff. My name is Pollman, P-O-L-L. Her name was Potoff, P-O-T-T. So I got stuck with the girl on my left. But it gets worse than that. The first black admitted to the University of Texas Law School was supposed to be seated in the basement being lectured separately from the class, and the dean ruled that that was not a full education because it's the repartee between students that's the real learning process. Well, where were they going to sit this Brown versus Painter? Where were they going to sit him? You know the case, Brown versus Painter? Anyway, they sit it next to the North Dakota boy. He had never met a black before. He didn't have, wouldn't bother him any. And so I had the only black in the law school on my right side and Beverly Potoff on my left side. That's why today I'm an equal opportunity officer for the federal government. I sign every year. So I told her, I said, they're going to discover oil in North Dakota. Claire Blickery just called me. He's on the farm next to there. We got a U-Haul trailer. We loaded it up, rented a U-Haul, hooked it on behind the car, drove to North Dakota, didn't have any place to go, went to Williston, North Dakota. Eddie Conlin, Conlin, who was the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce in that town of Williston, North Dakota, had been governor of Boy State, governor of Boy State, when I was a young boy in high school, when I was attorney general for Boy State. And I pulled into town, contacted the Chamber of Commerce, and he got me an attic and a house upstairs. It was pitched like this. The woman put our bed underneath the eaves like this. I enjoyed it because I had to flip over her to get inside the bed. She had to flip out because we couldn't get up and stand straight up till we got to the middle of the room. When you sat down the potty, you had to back into it like this, and then you could get up and stand up in the middle of the room because it wasn't high enough. That's the kind of attic she lived in when we came there. Beautiful girl, beautiful, beautiful clothes. Her father was in the clothing business, beautiful men's clothing, but she knew where to shop at Neiman Marcus at that time. And so they asked her if she would do nothing, no work, if she would just pretty and talk Southern and be a hostess at the hotel where all the Southerners were coming in. And so she stood in the lobby and greeted them with the you all and welcome y'all. She did all the you all stuff for the North Dakotans at that time. And I set up a practice of law, and I specialized in oil and gas law or anything else that would come through the door. I drew will. I never handled a divorce. I never handled a bankruptcy, but I handled business law and contracts for all the farmers. And I became the president of the Williams County Land and Royalty Owners Association, and I organized all the farmers who were independents and leased up hundreds of thousands of acres for Billy Rudman, and at 10 cents an acre, and 1/8 royalty. And Billy was very, very kind to me. After he had leased what he wanted in a certain area, he allowed me, which was against the rules, unless it was permitted, authorized, to checkerboard his leases. He gave me permission to what we call checkerboard his leases. In other words, I was permitted to buy minerals and buy leases on his information, which is secretive information. So after I'd done the work on a certain block, he'd say, pick you up, I didn't have any money. Pick you up 10 acres, Harold, pick you up 5 acres, pick you up 10 acres. Farmers didn't have any money to pay for their work if they wanted a $25 deed or a $15 deed, $25 will to be drawn. I'd say, you got 1,500 acres, you got 1,600 acres, you got 1,000. Because up in North Dakota, you have to do intensive farming. It is so drought-ridden that you can't plant small. You have to farm extensively rather than intensively. So everyone's got 1,800, 2,000 acres. So I'd say, just give me a mineral deed for 10 acres. 10 cents an acre, he gave me $1. You know, $1 an acre for perpetual minerals, he gave me $10. Hey, your bill is $15, give me 15. Go out there in front to Scadron, that was a girl that was my secretary out in front, and she was greeting people in the lobby, this one, visiting with the all men, and she was like the Chamber of Commerce greeter because she spoke the language. I'm from Dallas. And so anyway, that's where I did. I took 10 acres from one and 15 in the other, and it was worth $10, $15, and I ended up with all those minerals and everything from then on. It's history. After we had leased everything up and I had done Billy's work, well, I became consul to the North Dakota State Legislature, drafting the first code, the first oil and gas code for North Dakota law books. And I just flew down to Oklahoma City and plagiarized the Interstate Oil Compact Commission standard code and carried them back to the North Dakota Legislature. But I get credit for being attorney consul of record for drafting the first oil and gas laws in the state of North Dakota. I also handled the first case of first impression before the Supreme Court of North Dakota. First impression. By the way, at one of my legal appearances, Mr. Maxwell, the professor, had been hired by my opponent, the oil company, and we handled a case against each other, and I won the case. So I licked my professor on that particular case, so that was good. And then from North Dakota, we got done pretty much. They leased it up. I'd done Billy's work and everything, and she said she's pregnant with her first child, which is Cheryl Pollman here in town. And she said, we both agreed that we couldn't raise one child as the only Jew in that western North Dakota community. There was one Jewish family had a clothing store there, the Rowichers. So we made up our mind that we were going to raise our children in a Jewish community, and we loaded everything up, and we came back to Dallas, Texas, and I came back and set up a little office. Wasn't really an office. Jimmy Alexander and Arthur Goldberg emptied out a stock room where they had their forms and their papers. No windows, just the stock room. And they let me use the receptionist, Donna Morgan, as a scribe for me. And for about a year, I officed out of that stock room, no windows, just that room, until I got started, and then I got an office. And being interested in real estate law, as I was, and oil and gas is a real estate course, being interested in that, I opened up and got acquainted with people who were developing homes. And I became the second largest tract builder of VA and FHA homes in the city of Dallas. I poured 8 out of 10 slabs that were ever built in the city of town of Farmers Branch. So, and now...
And this was when?
50s.
50s.
54, 55, 56. I became president of the Greater Dallas Home and Apartment Builders Association, and the only Jew that has ever been president of the association. And I was installed in the international ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, which is not to say that, but I had heard every prayer ever committed for the installation of the president in the name of, and I decided that I would have Rabbi Klein install me. I thought that was a good comeuppance for the first Jewish president of the Home Builders Association. Today, I'm the longest standing member of the Dallas Home Buyers Association Board of Directors. I've been on the board for 50 years, 52 years now. I just received the award year before last. Continuous member of the Board of Directors. I go to Washington every May as a lobbyist, a Pete session. Oh, a flashback to my mother about politics. When I went into the military, she was Gerald Nye, pacifist, all that. By the time I came out of my 50 missions, shot down the whole Megillah, my mother was president of the American Legion Auxiliary, and was active in the American Legion Auxiliary very, very much. She had a change of viewpoint from pacifism to the Holocaust, then became known. We didn't know a lot about the Holocaust. It was almost a secret thing, especially living out there on the prairie, you know. And we heard, we had some German refugees came to live in our town, but we didn't know them, and they didn't speak, and you know. But once she got wind of what that thing was all about over there, American for American first and all that, once she got wind of it, she became very active in the American Legion and became president of the American Legion Auxiliary. I came to Dallas and was very active in the building business. And on every piece of land that I developed for 100, 120, 60 houses, 40 houses, 80 houses, I would leave out one corner. The city was glad to give me the zoning because I was bringing houses to the community, so they'd give me commercial zoning on the corner. I could get it easy if I brought 50, 100, 150, 200 houses to the community. All those little pieces of land. At those times, I had Mexican employees. Latino is more appropriate nowadays, but they were Mexican, illegal. And they were pouring my slabs, laying my brick, putting my asphalt shingles on, doing my copper plumbing, everything. Well, in those days, the housing business went from about February or March to October. We promised everyone we'd get them in time for school. But builders, we got them in, and we used to have to write letters. Yes, they are going to live in this, because they were transferring from Oak Cliff from here and there. We had to write a letter to the school board to let them register where they were going to be living. But once we finished and got everyone in October, the business went to nothing until next February, when we started building again for school delivery over the summer. What are you going to do with all the Mexican help? My subcontractors would lose all their help. They would give them to me. The owner of the company would go to California, go to Arizona, go someplace nice, but they would give me all their labor. And when I was paying $1 a sheet for hanging sheetrock, 8 feet tall, 4 feet wide sheet, $1 a sheet, they let me have the Mexicans with no overhead, no indirect cost, and no profit to them to hold their crews together over the winter, and I would pay them 50 cents a sheet. I would lay brick for a nickel a brick instead of a dime a brick. If you go to some of my little strips around town, and I have strips and centers in 12 or 14 different satellite communities around Dallas now. In the front, they're very nice. They're very nice. They're done well for the time, for the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, 80s. They're nice. But if you walk around the back, they'll have 20 gray brick, 20 beige brick, 14 antique brick, 12, no one threw nothing away on my job. And we made these little strips and centers all over the community on the leave-out pieces. The leave-out pieces were what I called winter work in the housing business. So I had labor at less than 50 cents a dollar. I had scrap material, and if you go into some of my Dairy Queens, Dairy Maids, which are now Vietnamese walk in, walk out, you sit down there in a booth, you can see every piece of sheetrock this big was saved, because you can follow the tape and bed joints pieces in there. They're still standing. They're still being rented. So it was a matter of born in the Depression, working hard, converting that experience into a saving attitude when you're building houses, save the scrap, and we built centers and strips and so forth. And nothing that I'm telling you is great. Nothing's big. This is not the big story. These are not big famous people stories. I lecture in Harvard. This will be my 15th year of lecturing to the Graduate School of Real Estate, only to candidates for a doctoral or master's degree. I asked Dean Gray, head of the graduate school at that time, I said, Dean, why do you send for a guy like me to come up here? You got Trammell Crow's people. You got Tishman Brothers people. You got Levitt people. You got all the big names in America. Why does a fellow like me come to Harvard and lecture? And he said, well, Mr. Pollman, that's because you are Mr. Little Man. I said, well, Dean, you could have talked to me all day, not put me down faster than that. One sentence, I'm Mr. Little Man? He said, yes. You talk about the nuts and bolts, and we call you the Muddy Shoe Lecture Series. And so for years after that, I had an attaché case on the last day of my lecture on Friday. I never teach past Friday noon, not because of religion. It's just 30 minutes from New York, from Boston. And I get on a jet, and I'm in New York by Friday noon and the whole weekend. When I finished my lectures on the series, I used to open the attaché tape, take out a pair of muddy, high-top shoes, and I didn't muddy them. That's the way they were from being out in the field. And I'd say, thus endeth the Muddy Shoe Lecture Series. And that I'll be back in Harvard next week.
Okay, we have to pause to change.
Shoot. Okay, say something.
Okay,
Oh,
let's talk about Dallas. When you first arrived here, Harold. Of course, your wife is from Dallas.
well, Kaufman.
From Kaufman.
Uh-huh.
We moved into Frederick Square Apartments, which we chose, one, because of the location, because it was in University Park, And secondly, because they had dishwashers. It was the first apartment complex in Dallas that had automatic dishwashers.
And
That's not important to you, but
It's very
that
important,
was
but
very
I don't
important to
think they were
me.
the first in Dallas, but okay. I didn't know Caruth was that far
And
behind.
what was the Dallas Jewish community like when you moved here? Because you moved here so your daughter could be raised with a Jewish community.
The temple was completely different. I mean, the temple was very Reformed Jewish, and it was not anything like it is now. The temple actually now is more conservative than it was then. But the children had well, they were in the process of building the new temple. We went to services, High Holy Day services at Fair Park Auditorium, and then we went to the Forest Avenue Theater. And I don't remember, Cheryl wasn't old enough for Sunday school, but she started Sunday school in the new temple building.
Our firstborn was actually, before we could hook up and head out of North Dakota, was actually born in North Dakota.
Oh, so she wasn't born here.
She was actually born in North Dakota.
The other two were born here in Dallas.
And Harold, can you tell us something about the Dallas Jewish business community at that time?
Well, the Dallas housing business community I know about. I don't know about the overall community, but Caruth had all the land in the world at that time. I have an award in there that I received a couple of years ago. Hugh Prather. Hugh Prather was very, very involved in housing, and he formed the Dallas Home Builders Association, and now they have an award in his name, Hugh Prather, because he was a fine builder and built good complexes. And since that time, the Hugh Prather Award has been given to Dave Fox, Bobby Folsom, who was a mayor of Dallas, and most of the people who were instrumental in housing. I had the privilege of being awarded that the year before last, the Hugh Prather. And the thing is, it's not given to the builder for his building prowess. It's not given to the builder for outstanding work. It's what he has done the most for his community, because an outstanding builder builds because it's a profit to him. He's trying to make a profit. He's trying to sell his houses. But what does he do exterior to that? And there were so many Hugh Prathers, Dave Fox, Bobby Folsom, Vernon and James Smith from Oak Cliff. They were the builders of that day when we were coming up, trying to emulate them. In those days, you didn't have to sell houses. There were 13.5 million men that were coming down the gangplank from service with, pardon me, with their hands on their zipper, and their girl in the house who had been writing them email. You don't know what V-mail. Now we call it email, V-mail. And what it was microfilm that was done in reels and put in a reel and then redeveloped when it got to the boys overseas. Well, they were standing in the doorway with that certificate to go down to the county courthouse, waiting. And the boy was coming down the gangplank with his zipper, figuratively the gangplank. And the government in their wisdom decided that they were going to crank up this country and get it going, so they made the VA Bill of Rights, the GI Bill of Rights. And you could get a no down payment, zero down, nothing down, home, 4% interest. But the federal government wanted the boy to have some equity in there. They wanted him to have an equity in there, so he had something to lose. So they required him to pay the closing costs. The closing cost was $200. There wasn't a prospective father-in-law in the world that wouldn't put up the $200 to get that mooning girl out of the house. And so the father-in-law popped for the $200, I wasn't a builder. I didn't know a 2x4 from a 2x6. I didn't know sheetrock from gyprock. I was a procurer. I was a procurer. I could get asphalt shingles where no one else could find shingles. I could find copper tubing for plumbing. I could find copper wire for plumbing. I could get material. I hired a general contractor, Wayne Stiles, subsequently had 2 boys who became builders in the community. And so all I had to do is get the merchandise. Then I went down to Aubrey Costa of Love and Costa. I went down to Uncle Louis. Who's Uncle Louis? Louis Hexter. He was the paterfamilias of every builder in this city. He was the paterfamilias. You went to Uncle Louis for everything. And I went down and I said, can I? And they said, yeah, you can do it. I don't know about building. Just get the stuff. So I got mortgage loans from Love and Costa, Aubrey Costa. I got mortgage loans from Prudential Insurance. Nothing down. VA, government guaranteed it. The down payment for FHA homes was $500, 4% interest, and I went to building houses. To me, it was Williston, North Dakota, #2. It was a bonanza waiting to happen. And I saw these guys coming back, and I knew they needed houses, and I knew a little bit about real estate from my law practice. And I went and I scurried up money from Prudential, was one of my biggest lenders, and Love and Costa, Aubrey Costa. Uncle Louis advised me every time I had a question. I'm driving down Webb Chapel, and I see 60 acres of land, empty. And I say, 4 to an acre, that's 240 houses. Maybe if I massage the city, I might get 5 to an acre. That's 300 houses. Went back to City Hall. Who owns that land? They said, a guy by the name of Ray. Is he a big guy here in town? No, he's just some little guy. He's doing some building here in town. Wait a minute, don't laugh. That was in 50s. So I said, okay, we could get the exact date very easily here. So I'm going down Central Expressway, and I see all that land at the corner of Central Expressway and Northwest Highway. And there are bulldozers out there, and there's Laternos. Laterno's a huge machine that scrapes the dirt and put. And there were 10 or 15 out there. And I drove in there and I said, what is all that going on there? And they say, oh, there's a guy gonna build a shopping center on this corner. I said, who owns the land? They said, Caruth owns the land, but he's flipped it to the Boy Scouts as a gift. And the Boy Scouts have sold it to some guy by the name of Nasher. We don't know if he's got title to it yet from the Boy Scout, but he's starting to build. So I said, oh. So I call up my office. I say, Alice, look in the book. Where is there a guy by the name of Nasher? She said, the Republic National Bank building. I didn't go to my office. I drove down to the bottom of the Republic National Bank building, garage underneath, took the elevator up to the 15th or 18th floor, found Mr. Nasher's office, sat down in his reception room, and said, I want to see Mr. Nasher. They said, do you know him? I said, no. Does he know you? No. I'd like to see him. I read every magazine he had in the reception room twice. He finally came out because that girl said I wouldn't go away. Got to get rid of this guy. Mr. Nasher, yes. Harold Pollman, yes. I'm a builder of homes, and I build homes, and I build all over in Farmers Branch, Carrollton, that area, and I'm just about out of lots. And you've got about 60 acres there. Maybe it's 50. And I'd like to buy it. He said, well, I didn't have it up for sale. I said, I know, but I'd like to buy it. And let me tell you why I ought to buy it and you ought to sell it. He said, why do you think so? Come in my office, sit down. I said, okay. I went in, I sat down, and he said, why do you think you ought to buy it? Why do you think I ought to sell it? Well, first of all, I ought to buy it because I'm housing GIs, and I can sell them. I don't even have to sell them, I just have to sign them up as fast as I can get them built. I need more land. And I said, you ought to sell it because there's a new law on the books, and that is all that money. You got about 10 Laternos out there, and you pay those guys $100 an hour for that machine. And I said, that's $1,000 an hour. And I said, with that much money being spent, there's a new law that you don't have to take your cost and put it in the building and depreciate it over 30, 40 years. You don't have to take depreciation. The government, in order to encourage the generating of business, to foment business, are giving developers immediate write-off of the developmental expense. You can take an immediate write-off of every cent on the dollar you spend, and you don't have to amortize it over 30, 40 years. And you ought to sell anything you can sell and take it off so you don't have to pay taxes on it all at this time with all that money you're spending. He said, Mr. Pollman, you're preaching to the choir. I know that law. I said, I'm sorry. I just thought I'd hit on something that I'd let you know. I said, but I understand your tax attorney is Reuben Ginsburg here in town. He said, yes. I said, call Reuben, ask him if what I said is correct. He said, what'll you pay me for the land? I said, Mr. Nasher, I don't have any idea. I have no idea what I can pay you for this land. But I'll tell you what I will do. I'll have my engineers develop a plan at my expense. I'll have my architects design 5 houses. That's all you had to have for FHA and VA then, was 5 houses, cookie cutter, every 5th. They said you have to have 5 houses, and I made every 5th one the same, so I cheated a little bit. I put different shutters on. So anyway, I'll have a set of plans. I'll file it with FHA VA. They give you what is called a CRV, Certificate of Reasonable Value. And they attribute the value of the lot and the house separately. And I will give you every dime that the government says is a fair price for that lot. I'll develop it, and I'll use Warren Blackman of Austin Paving Company to develop it, because he's developing your North Park. And you can look at all of his bids and look at all the prices I bid. And I said, in case you don't know me and maybe I'm not honest and everything, call Uncle Louie. Uncle Louie will tell you about me. He says, I'll do that. He called Uncle Louie and called me back in about 10 days. He said, come to my office. I came. He said, Louis Hexter said that you get the highest appraisals in the city for tract housing. You get the highest appraisal, the highest CRV from VA that they give, and that you get the highest dollar, and that I should go with you. We didn't sign a contract. We didn't sign a letter. We didn't have an agreed price. I filed with FHA VA. I got the price appraisal on the lots. I brought it to Mr. Nasher. Nasher says, that's a good price for those lots. And he equated it to raw land. And we shook hands, and he went over to Hexter Title Company and signed a document for closing, and I signed a document. And Ray Nasher, 2 years ago, at a Harvard luncheon, and his daughter Annette,
Nancy. Nancy.
No, the other one, the younger one, the blonde, kinky
Yeah, I
hair.
don't know her name.
She was there at that dinner. Ray Nasher got up and said, that's the only man I've ever sold anything to in my life at no agreed price. And he tells that story every time he and I are together. That's the only man I have ever sold anything to on a handshake at a no agreed price. And we did, and we shook hands, and I bought it and closed it, and Ray Nasher tells that story. We talked about it in Shul when we were waiting for the second shift to start on Yom Kippur. He was sitting a couple rows ahead of me. And I said, you got anything for sale at no agreed price? He said, not lately. And the daughter says, I want to go to lunch with you. This was several years ago when we were together, and he told that story to a luncheon group. She said, I got to get together and have lunch with you. My father never sold anything without an agreed price. I said, well, there's an instance of it. So that's the way I did it. I'm still doing things like this. McKinney went different and changed 2 years ago, 3 years ago now. The downtown section 40 years ago was all there was around the square, around the courthouse. That's all there was. I built the first shopping center that was a shopping center on the east side of town where Central Expressway went north, Highway 75. I built that. Held it until the last couple of years ago, and it all turned Latino. It all turned Mexicano. And I got the blue-collared workers, I got the pickup trucks, I got the food stamps, and everything moved over to the east side of town. What happened about 3 years ago, I guess it's 3 years ago now, the worst thing in the history of McKinney happened. You're a historian. The worst thing happened. A Latino got elected to the city council. Redneck, 125-year-old McKinney. You historians know about McKinney. It's older than that, I think. And a redneck got elected to the city council. But the story gets worse. It wasn't just a redneck. Horror of horror, for the first time in the history of McKinney, it was a woman. Can you imagine a worse combination in McKinney? A female Latino on the city council? She sat through one meeting, she sat through 2 meetings. She raised her hand. Senors, all of the good roads are on the west side of town. All of the new schools are on the west side of town. All of the paving, all of the potholes, all the new light standards on the west side of town. You are doing nothing for my people. And they said, Miss Gutierrez, you're right. You're right. We're going to appoint a committee and do a search on that immediately. Fast forward 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Senors, no committee report. The committee report is due. We will have it here within the next month. She comes in a month later. No report, nothing done for her people on the east side of town. She introduces her to a gentleman. She introduced the city council to a gentleman who's sitting in the audience of the city council. Gentlemen of city council, I'd like to introduce you to the president of LULAC, Latin Union for Latin American Communities. The national president was from Dallas that year. She schleps him in, and he says, gentlemen, something must be done about this. You have been federally funded to clean up your water system. And you're mandated to do it, but you've got a federal grant to do it with. If we file a discrimination suit while the government is investigating the propriety of our accusation, your funds will be impounded. You're targeting to build an executive jet port up here. While this discrimination suit, which could take 2-3 years, is being investigated, the government isn't going to fund these things. I think something needs to be done about it. Well, that did it. The council got busy. They gave a grant to all Latino people who wanted to move into my shopping center on that side of town. And it was $200,000-300,000. But they couldn't give it to me because they have to give it to every developer. So they gave it to the merchant. But they couldn't give it to the merchant because every Latino merchant that moved to Kinney would want to have part of that grant. So what they did is they allowed the merchant to sign a note at the bank backed by the full faith and credit of the city of McKinney. And what they did is permit the Latino merchant to pay back the note to the bank out of retained city sales tax. And that sales tax, did the city lose money in giving away their sales tax to amortize that note? No. Sales zoomed. They were getting a pittance. They were getting virtually nothing in sales tax. It zoomed. These merchants have paid off their sales tax abatement loans. Didn't cut. And what did you do for all that big old Harold, your shopping center? I did a matching grant refurbishment of my shopping center that had a 30, 40-year-old roof on it, right? Had a 30, 40-year-old parking lot on it, right? So I matched the city funds with the improvement of the center. My merchants met with me yesterday from up there to look at land that I have in Garland to build another. I have a supermercado, I have a conoceria, meat market, a taqueria, a discoteca for disco music, and I have another, and I was in Garland before you got here this morning at 7 o'clock this morning. And I was there and visiting on that piece of land with my men, with my engineers, with my people, and I had my Mexican merchants down yesterday looking at the site. We're doing socioeconomic demographics on that area.
Now, you've given back to the community, though, in other ways.
What?
I know that you've been providing Thanksgiving dinners to needy people.
Oh, yeah, the little, yeah, right.
Can you tell us something about that?
Well, yes. When Pollman Hall was built, I saw it as an opportunity to use it in a fashion other than for education and other than for as an adjunct shul, which they use it for now, overflow shul and everything. So in visiting, my first Thanksgiving dinner to give thanks was welcome home from the choir's tour of Europe. And so when they came back from their tour of Europe, I gave a Thanksgiving dinner for their carrying Temple Emmanuel's banner over Europe. Then I went to people in the social outreach people, Ruth Andrus, other people, Renee Karp, and said, hey, this is a good deal on Thanksgiving dinner. Who do we give Thanksgiving dinners to? I probably do not have this in sequential order, but we have had as our guest, the second one, let's say, that'll work out, as second it was, after the choir, was Russian refugees' first Thanksgiving in America, who were living at Golden Acres in some kind of a dormitory out there. You know about that. And there were Russian people there. I got wind of that, contacted whoever I contacted and say, hey, this is their first Thanksgiving in America. Let's tell them what Thanksgiving is all about. So they were bussed over, and David Karp learned through Renee what I was doing, and he had some Russian students studying music on the SMU campus. And he brought me a violinist, an accordion player, a piano player, and a singer. And they sang Russian folk songs and Russian songs, and those old women were sitting on that front row and clapping, and they were like back in their home again. And then I had a bilingual Russian lady, and I went to Barnes & Noble, and I bought a little book like this, just a little book about the Pilgrim's first Thanksgiving in America. And it was simply written, and it showed pictures of Tecumseh with the deer over his shoulder and with the turkey he was carrying to the pilgrims. And I would read one paragraph from the Barnes & Noble, and she would recite that paragraph to the Russians. And so that was the second Thanksgiving. After that, there's a place in town here that has used to be a junior college, not Jewish, junior college. And they got a campus, it's over somewhere. I remember I used to drive by. But now they use the dorms and the rooms for girls who are victims of drug addiction. And some of them stay 6 months, some of them stay 6 weeks, some of them stay 18 months, I don't know how long. But young women addicted to drugs go for, so we had them for a Thanksgiving dinner, along with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Dallas, Greater Dallas, and that's mothers and fathers' duality of employment in the family. Don't get out of work till 5, 6 o'clock, and the kinderlach get out of school, shouldn't run in the streets. they take them to these boys and girls clubs until the parents coming home from work can pick them up. So we had the boys and girls clubs from all over. The next year we had battered women and children. And there's a thing called Nexus, you people know maybe more about that. And battered women and children, when some guy busts his wife in the eye and she has to grab the children and run away till her folks, her sister comes for her, or her parents come from Iowa and take her back, whatever, they have to have shelter. So we had the shelter, women and children and other shelters. I wanted to have homeless there from the streets to come into the temple. But security at the temple turned that down from a security viewpoint, that I couldn't drag everyone in from under every bridge in town. So that was a declination. One of my most rewarding, and I don't know which group it was, I've got pictures on all this, and scrap, you see my albums in there, they're that big and they're that full, and I've got hundreds of them. But one of my most rewarding was a big group, 200 plus, that all wanted to see the Torah. They'd read about something. And we took them through the education wing and up on the bima, took the Torah out of the Oren Kodesh and laid it out, and it was chanted by the rabbi and by Renee Karp did some reading out of the Torah, and they were fascinated by all
And
that.
a young man named Liji.
Liji, a fellow by the name of Liji.
Alan Liji?
Yeah, he read out of the Torah, and he did the explaining part of what the Torah and what the scrolls mean. I haven't named all the groups, but there's 9 years of that type of Thanksgiving.
Victory Meadows Learning Center.
The Victory Meadows Learning Center, of course, last year and again this year. They're going again this year, and you know what they do for educating into the language for adults and children to become conversant. And
Can you tell us about your family today?
Our
What family?
family
Your family
today.
today, yeah.
Our
Oh,
children?
my.
Your children, your
Oh,
grandchildren?
that's a big story. Well, our oldest daughter, Cheryl, I think most of you know, she's an attorney by profession,
Cheryl was a litigation attorney,
and
and she married a litigator. And one was picking a jury and was like this, and one had a jury out and was like that at the same time. So she left being a litigation attorney and went to corporate counsel. She was the highest ranked female, because there weren't very many females, on the corporate attorney staff for 7-Eleven. And when, I believe this is correct, when 7-Eleven was doing work in Japan for the first time. She went to Japan. Did Cheryl go to Japan? No.
yes, but
Yeah.
when the Japanese took over the management of
7-Eleven over there.
she left.
Then she left.
She retired to stay home with her
And
children.
she left and became a house mother and a temple worker extensively. Our middle daughter,
I'm not finished
But,
yet.
but how many
Oh.
children and all that?
3.
Cheryl is on the board of the temple and on
Yeah.
the board of National Council of Jewish
And the
Women.
Historical Society.
Dallas Jewish Historical Society.
And,
I'm on our board.
and the Jewish Historical Society.
And the Jewish Historical Society,
oh,
right.
really?
And our middle daughter, Janet, is the linguist in the family. She went to Northwestern University Conservatory of Music as a music student when she graduated high school at Green Hill, and did not like music theory and got into languages, which have made a whole life for her. She is currently the honorary consul to Spain and has been for a number of years here in Dallas. And she's very involved. She's on the board of the Meadows Museum, and she's very involved in Latino affairs in the city of Dallas. And Marcy, our youngest daughter, is married and has 2 darling little boys. She has an MBA from SMU, but she worked in the advertising industry until her children, she had 2 children, and then it became so difficult for her to keep the hours that she retired, and she stays home with her kids.
How
The
many
old-
grandchildren?
How old are the grandchildren?
How many?
We have 5 grandchildren. Cheryl has 2. Dyla, age 18, a freshman at the University of Denver, and Benjamin, 15, who's a freshman in high school at Green Hill. And Janet has only one boy who is a sophomore at Occidental College in California. And Marcy has two little boys, 10 and 13, who are both at Green Hill.
Thank you. Harold, what are you most proud of all the things that you've done? And you've done many, many things.
Well, in the first litany, extensive litany, I failed to mention that I was a Rhodes Scholarship candidate and went off to the military and so forth. But, you know, that's an accomplishment, I guess, of sorts. I was president of the Williams County Bar Association in Williston, North Dakota. A Jewish boy, the only Jew in 400-mile radius to become the president-elect of the Williams County Bar Association before I left for North Dakota to serve out that term. Case of first impression, Supreme Court in North Dakota. The local awards, the Prather Award, a spectacular award. The names on there I do not deserve to have my name engraved with the names that I see, that I read on that. What do you list as a thing you're most proud of? And I can tell you, it's not that hard. Rabbi Zimmerman called me and wanted to arrange a dinner in Pollman Hall, in which they dedicated Pollman Hall and gave me a hoopla dinner. And I told Rabbi Zimmerman that I would not go for such a dinner, nor would I attend it, nor would I be a part of any such thing. I would have to reject his kindness and the community's kindness, the Temple family's kindness. I'm answering your question just in a second here. I told Rabbi Zimmerman that what he was looking at was a conduit, probably kind of part of my construction background, that I was just a conduit, and that all that I am and all that I have is passing through me on the way to where God has chosen to pass through me to where it belongs, really. We have enough to eat coming out of depression, 10 cents an hour, $1 a day. My mother got $10 a week for groceries, and out of that, she swiped enough to buy a dress. My mother never went without a hat and gloves up to her elbow. I brought you pictures here. Always a hat, always gloves up to the elbow. My mother saw a very, very big house in Grand Forks that she liked and loved. She asked my father to buy it for her and put a loan on it, HOLC, Homeowners Loan Corporation, predecessor to FHA. And he said, we can't afford that great big house. It was the second most sumptuous house on Belmont Road, French name, Belmont, high mountain. Beautiful, beautiful mountain. And she said, if you will buy it for me, because men were everything, if you will buy it for me, you will never make the first payment. I will pay for every mortgage payment on this home, taxes and insurance. And he said, Sally, you don't work. She says, I'll keep my promise. She moved my sister out of her bedroom and took in 2 school teachers. And she kept 2 school teachers and provided their breakfast and their supper. Sometimes she packed them a lunch if there was enough leftovers. Other times they ate on the campus at the cafeteria. She took in 2 school teachers and kept them all those years. My father did a little better. I'm sure he helped her from time to time. But when it was ready to pay off, my father got in the pickup with me and drove to Omaha, Nebraska from North Dakota. Why? Because he had the check for the last payment and he wanted to pick up his papers. He was going to pay off the note and he wanted to pick up his papers. He didn't trust the government should give him his paid up mortgage. I want to pick up my papers with my check. And so we drove down to Omaha and slept overnight in the pickup with straw there and with a canvas. One of the most beautiful nights I've ever spent in my life. Under the stars with my father, sleeping out there and going to pay off my home. I inject that because you have to know where I'm coming from to know where I'm at. You have to know where I'm coming from with what I'm doing. When I say to Rabbi Zimmerman, I'm just a conduit, Rabbi. I'm passing it through. It's not mine. It's mine to transfer over. What am I proudest of? I'm proudest that I've lived to this day to see that my children and my grandchildren and my wife, no one has food, no one has medical, no one has housing, no one has closing needs that are not only provided for, but sumptuously provided for. The proudest I am is how much this little hick from North Dakota has to give away. I am so proud to be able to do these things.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, I didn't
need a
want to
hug.
wax
You
emotional.
need a hug.
I'm sorry.